Right now, half the production lines at Britain's biggest car factory are sitting empty. 6,000 jobs, one of the most important factories in the country, and the company that might fill that empty space isn't British, isn't Japanese, and isn't a name most Americans could pick out of a lineup yet. By 2027, the plant that's built Nissan SUVs for 4 decades could be building cars for a Chinese automaker instead. And here's the part that makes this bigger than one factory. This exact sequence of events has already happened once before in Britain 20 years ago, almost beat for beat. Nobody connected the dots the first time. We're about to. Here's the number that explains everything else in this video. Chinese car brands took roughly 15% of the entire British new car market in the first half of 2026, about 175,000 cars. 2 years ago, that number was close to 0. If you're watching this from the US, you might be wondering why a story about British car factories matters to you. Here's why. American tariffs have effectively kept Chinese automakers out of US showrooms so far. Britain didn't put up that same wall, which means the UK is running the experiment America hasn't had to run yet. What actually happens to a mature car industry when Chinese manufacturers are allowed to compete on price, with no restrictions? The answer, so far, is a string of factory closures that all sound reasonable individually, and a pattern that only becomes obvious once you line them up. Number 1. The patterns start with Ford's Bridgend engine plant in South Wales, open since 1980, supplying engines to Jaguar, Land Rover, and Ford itself. Closed in 2019. Ford's official reasoning: falling demand for the specific engines it built, part of a broader European restructuring. Not Brexit, the company insisted, though plenty of locals didn't buy that explanation. 1,700 jobs gone either way, in a town where the plant had been the largest employer for 2 generations. Then, Honda's Swindon plant by the 2010s, the 4th largest car factory in the country, building the Civic for both the UK and export markets. Closed in 2021. Honda's stated reason: it needed to concentrate electric vehicle production where global demand was highest, and Swindon wasn't going to be part of that future. Here's the detail worth holding on to, because it comes back later in this video. In its final years, Swindon was building around 150,000 cars a year in a plant designed to build 250,000. Roughly 60% capacity. A factory running at 60% doesn't usually announce it's dying. It just quietly stops being worth keeping open. Then, Vauxhall's Luton plant, 120 years of continuous vehicle production in that town, gone. Stellantis pointed to Britain's zero-emission vehicle mandate, arguing that consumer demand for EVs wasn't matching the sales quotas the regulation required manufacturers to hit. The badge survives. You can still buy a Vauxhall tomorrow. The British factory that actually built it can't. Notice what these 3 companies have in common. Each gave a specific, defensible, individually reasonable explanation. None of them blamed the workers. And every single one left a hole in a local economy that reached well past the factory gates. Swindon alone was estimated to support roughly 10,000 additional jobs in its surrounding supply chain, stacked on top of the 3,500 lost on site. Multiply that pattern by 3 factories, and you start to understand why this feels different from a normal industry downturn. Number 2. This isn't the first time. Here's the thing almost nobody watching this in 2026 remembers. Britain has run this exact experiment before, and it wasn't with China. It was with itself. In the 1970s, most of Britain's car industry was consolidated into a single sprawling, government-owned company called British Leyland Austin, Morris, Triumph, Jaguar, Rover, all under one roof, employing hundreds of thousands of people at its peak. And through the 70s and into the 80s, it fell apart in slow motion, strikes, chronic underinvestment, quality control problems that became a national joke, and a wave of Japanese imports that were simply better built and cheaper to run. By the time British Leyland was broken up and privatized piece by piece in the 80s, Britain had gone from being one of the world's largest car exporters to a country that mostly imported the cars it drove. What rose from those ashes was Rover Group, sold to BMW in 1994. Spun back out a few years later when BMW decided it wasn't worth the trouble, and eventually split off as an independent company called MG Rover in 2000. It was, by then, the last British-owned volume car manufacturer left standing, the last one. In 2005, MG Rover collapsed into administration. Nearly 6,000 jobs vanished overnight at Longbridge. The old Austin Works in Birmingham, a site that had built cars continuously for over a century. And here's the detail that connects directly to everything happening at Sunderland right now. A Chinese company had already been in talks to invest in MG Rover before the collapse actually happened. After the administration, both the MG badge and the Longbridge site ended up in Chinese hands. Production limped along for another decade before finally stopping for good in 2016. Read that sequence back slowly, because it's about to repeat almost exactly. British company struggles. Chinese company is already circling before the struggle becomes public. British company falls. Chinese company acquires what's left. The factory runs a while longer, building cars for its new owner. Then, eventually, even that stops. 2 decades later, MG is now the single best-selling Chinese-owned brand in Britain, nearly 49,000 cars registered in the first half of this year, with more UK dealerships than Mazda and Honda combined. You've probably driven past 3 of them today without clocking what you are actually looking at. Why Chinese EVs are so much cheaper? Before we get to what's happening at Sunderland right now, there's a question this story doesn't work without answering. Why can Chinese automakers build cars this much cheaper in the first place? Because the price gap isn't a rounding error, it's the entire reason any of this is happening. Start with batteries, since that's the single most expensive component in any EV. China doesn't just build a lot of batteries, it controls something close to 2/3 of global battery cell manufacturing capacity, and an even larger share of the lithium refining and processing that feeds into them. That's not really a manufacturing advantage in the normal sense. It's closer to owning the well that everyone else has to buy water from. Western and Japanese automakers are, to varying degrees, buying battery cells from suppliers who compete with their own Chinese-owned counterparts on price, while Chinese automakers building at home are sourcing from an industry their own country spent 2 decades deliberately building up through direct investment and subsidy. Then there's vertical integration. BYD, the largest of the Chinese EV makers, doesn't just assemble cars, it manufactures its own batteries, its own semiconductors, and even its own car carrying ships to export them, cutting out layer after layer of supplier margin that a company like Ford or Nissan simply has to pay someone else for. And then there's scale, compounding on top of both of those advantages. China's domestic car market is enormous, and Chinese manufacturers have been able to build production volume at home first, driving unit costs down, before exporting the leftover capacity abroad at prices that would be unprofitable for a company starting from a smaller base. Put those 3 things together: cheaper batteries, no supplier markup, and massive built-in scale, and an Automotive 5 starting around 24,000 next to a comparably equipped Nissan Qashqai starting closer to 30,000 stops looking like a mystery. It's not a fluke of pricing strategy. It's the direct output of a decade of industrial policy most Western car buyers never noticed happening. Number 3, the new arrivals. And why you haven't seen one yet, which brings us to how fast this is actually moving. Chery Group, parent of Automotive, Jaguar, and the Chery brand itself, didn't exist in the British market 3 years ago. It started selling cars there in January 2025. 19 months later, its Juice 7 model was the single best-selling new car in Britain for an entire month, ahead of the Ford Puma and the Nissan Qashqai, 2 cars that have anchored the top of British sales charts for the better part of a decade. In one recent month, Chery alone reportedly outsold Honda and Mazda's entire UK operations combined. BYD outsold Tesla in Britain across all of 2025. And Chinese brands as a whole now outsell Japanese and Korean brands there, which matters, because that growth isn't just reshuffling an existing pie. Most of the recent growth in the entire British new car market has come from a handful of Chinese brands, which means, mathematically, every one of those sales is coming directly out of Ford's, Nissan's, and Vauxhall's numbers. Now, if this is all happening, Why haven't you seen a Bide or a Chery on an American highway? This is where the US and UK stories genuinely split apart, and it's worth understanding why. The US currently applies tariffs of roughly 100% on Chinese-made electric vehicles, a level specifically designed to make them commercially unviable in the American market, regardless of how cheap they are to build. The European Union added its own tariffs on top of standard rates in 2024, ranging up into the high 30s%, after finding that Chinese EV makers were benefiting from subsidies that gave them an unfair price advantage. Britain, notably, did neither. No matching tariff wall, no formal investigation blocking the door, just an open market and a £6,000 price gap doing the rest of the work on its own. That's the actual reason this story is unfolding in Britain first and not in Ohio or Michigan. It's not that Chinese cars are fundamentally better suited to British roads. It's that Britain is one of the only major Western car markets that didn't build a wall to stop this particular experiment from running. For the strangest detail in this whole story, here's something most people on either side of the Atlantic genuinely haven't heard yet. Land Rover built the Freelander from 1997 to 2015, briefly Europe's best-selling compact 4x4, and the first production vehicle in the world with hill descent control. Discontinued, and most people assumed the name was retired for good, filed away next to other beloved nameplates that quietly disappear. It isn't retired. Jaguar Land Rover has licensed the Freelander name to its own Chinese joint venture, with Chery relaunched not as a Land Rover, but as a standalone brand. Built in China on a Chery platform, sold through Chery-run dealerships, with 6 models reportedly planned and export ambitions that explicitly include the UK. When Jeller's own leadership was asked directly whether they'd move to block Chery from eventually selling Freelanders back in Britain, the reported answer was almost disarmingly simple. It's Chery's car now, and they'll let them sell it. Sit with that for a second. A British nameplate with a genuine engineering legacy, built in China on a Chinese platform, sold back to British buyers with its original owner's active blessing, not its objection. That's not a company losing a fight. That's a company that's already decided which fights are worth having. 5. Sunderland, which finally brings us back to the plant we started with. Nissan Sunderland factory opened in 1986. It became Britain's biggest car plant, roughly 6,000 direct employees, building the Qashqai, the Juke, and the electric Micra and Leaf. Right now, it's running at close to 50% of its total production capacity, half of Britain's largest car factory, sitting idle. In May, Nissan announced it was consolidating its Sunderland output onto a single production line, part of roughly 900 job cuts across its European operations. That decision freed up a second line, with literally nothing scheduled to run on it. In June, Nissan and Chery signed a non-binding agreement to explore contract manufacturing Nissan, potentially building Chery's Juice 7 on that spare line, with production starting as early as 2027. The plant stays Nissan's. The workers stay Nissan employees, but the cars physically coming off that second line could carry a badge that didn't exist in Britain 3 years ago. To be clear, this isn't finalized. It's a non-binding agreement actively under discussion, and either side can still walk away from it. But the fact that it's even on the table tells you something on its own. Britain's biggest car factory has enough spare capacity sitting unused that its own owner is seriously discussing renting part of it out to a company that sold 0 cars in that market 36 months ago. 6. Both sides of this, there's a genuinely fair case for this deal, and it deserves real airtime. Not just a token mention. Unite, the union representing these workers, has welcomed the arrangement. An idle production line employs nobody at all. A running one employs thousands of British workers, paying British tax, feeding a British parts and logistics supply chain that touches far more people than the factory floor itself. If Chinese-designed cars are going to sell in these numbers in Britain, regardless of where they're built, building them in Sunderland instead of shipping them across the world from Shanghai is strictly better for that region's economy. Full stop. Contract manufacturing itself isn't even unusual. This isn't some unprecedented humiliation unique to Nissan. Magna builds cars for multiple different brands out of a single plant in Austria. Valmet does essentially the same thing in Finland. A factory building someone else's product under contract isn't automatically a symbol of decline. But there's a more uncomfortable version of the same truth sitting underneath all of that. For 40 years, the entire arrangement at Sunderland was that Britain designed cars, engineered cars, and sold them to the world from British soil. What's being discussed right now runs in the exact opposite direction: somebody else's design, somebody else's brand, built in Sunderland because the floor space happened to be sitting empty. It's still 6,000 jobs. It's still physically Sunderland, but it's an entirely different position in the global auto industry than the one this exact plant occupied on the day it opened in 1986. Could this happen in America? So, could a version of this ever play out at a plant in Ohio, Kentucky, or Tennessee? Right now, the honest answer is not directly and not soon, because of that 100% tariff wall we talked about earlier. That wall isn't an accident. It exists specifically because policymakers in Washington watched what started happening in Europe and decided they didn't want to run Britain's experiment on American soil. But there's a debate happening in U.S. trade policy circles worth knowing about, because it's the one crack in that wall. Chinese automakers, blocked from exporting finished cars directly into the U.S., have instead been exploring building assembly plants in Mexico, which, under existing North American trade agreements, could allow vehicles built there to reach American buyers with dramatically lower tariffs than a car shipped straight from China. As of this video, U.S. trade officials have been actively examining ways to close that specific loophole before it becomes a real pathway. It hasn't been fully closed yet, and it hasn't been widely used yet either, but it's the one scenario analysts point to when they're asked how this story could eventually cross the Atlantic in a more direct form than it already has. In other words, the wall is real, but nobody's entirely sure yet whether it's actually finished being built. What this means for you if you happen to be shopping for a car in the UK this year, or you're simply curious what this looks like from the buyer's side. Choosing a Chery, a Moda, or MG isn't choosing a worse car. Reviews have generally been solid, equipment levels are high for the price, and warranties are frequently longer than what the established brands offer. But go in aware of two specific things. Resale value on a brand with under 2 years of UK sales history has essentially no real track record, yet nobody actually knows what a 3-year-old Q7 will be worth on the used market, because none exist yet to check. And insurance, some UK insurers have been quoting noticeably higher premiums on newly arrived Chinese models, and a handful have reportedly declined to quote at all, simply because there's no claims history yet to price the risk against. If you're actually considering one, get a real quote on your exact model and postcode before you commit to anything, rather than assuming it'll price the same as an equivalent Japanese or Korean car. 4 major British car plants gone in under a decade. The last British-owned volume manufacturer gone since 2005, and its old nameplate now sold back to British drivers by the very company that once tried to save it. And the country's single biggest car factory now openly discussing whether to build someone else's cars just to keep its second production line from sitting empty forever. Remember that number from the very start of this video: half the lines at Britain's biggest car factory doing nothing. That's not really a story about one factory or even one country. It's a preview. And whether it stays a British story or eventually crosses the Atlantic mostly comes down to whether that 100% tariff wall holds. So tell me honestly, if this eventually reaches American showrooms, would you buy a Chinese-designed car built by American workers? Or does the badge still matter to you? I think this comment section is going to split right down the middle, and I want to see exactly where that line actually falls. Subscribe, because the next 12 months at Sunderland and the next move on that tariff wall are going to answer a lot of this for us.